Today with me, we have a great panel. We have John Eichenberger, Executive Director at the Fuels Institute. Founded by NACS in 2013, the Fuels Institute is a non-profit that evaluates market issues related to vehicles and the energy that powers them. With more than 20 years of related experience, Eichenberger is a recognized expert on the transportation energy market. With us is also Robert Kraus, the Chief Operating Officer of electric vehicle charging business at Diebold Nixdorf. His responsibilities mainly cover the fields of services, global service desk, logistics, legal, and marketing. We also have Michelle Schultz, who is the Vice President of Sales for Europe at Tritium. Tritium has installed over 6,700 DC fast chargers globally and has been active in DC power management for over 21 years, bringing innovative solutions to this fast-growing market. The aim of this session today is to look at some of the big questions around EV charging, fuel retailers, and how that business can develop forward. We'll try to answer some questions, however difficult, like what is the business case for forecourt operators? When is the best time to get into the market? What's the most suitable technology? And we'll also look at some of the technical challenges involving servicing, security, payments, and data. There won't be many slides in this presentation as we want to keep it dynamic and more based around what the panelists want to say. I invite everyone watching to share the questions through the Q&A, and I will try to include as many as I can. I will also be launching 2 polls, very short ones, while we have our conversation to try and get some of your own input. Despite the pandemic and most of the economy worldwide going into recession, it was still a record year for electric vehicle sales around the world. China represented the biggest part of the pie, nearly tripling their sales to 3.4 million. Europe will have the biggest share of their own total vehicle sales, with 17% of the total sales in the continent. We've seen some countries like Norway, which has actually lost 3% from 75 to 72, and we've seen countries like Sweden and the Netherlands reaching 45%, 30, which are certainly very strong numbers. The US, despite doubling its figure, electric vehicle sales only accounted for 4.5, but the trend says otherwise, and we've seen ambitious plans presented by Joe Biden, where they target 500,000 chargers over the next years, and they're definitely following in that trend. So to start today with the first question, Michelle, I'd like to go into you and say, when you deal with forecourt operators and fuel retailers, and you speak to them, what do you think is the business case for installing chargers at their stations?
Yeah, I think Oscar, if you look at those numbers that you just put up, we see a trend that over the past years, the EV numbers have been doubling globally, with China leading this trend, clearly showed in your figures. But then zooming in a little bit on the European market, we see that last year, 2.3 million cars have been sold. Which is compared to last year, or 2020 then, the year before, an increase of 66%. Yeah, we really see that, and we were just talking about it also in our intro together, that it's really now to get on the boat and get ahead of the curve. So the fuel retailers, the uptake of EVs is going so fast that this increase, retailers really need to get their stations in as soon as possible if they want to take advantage of this basically this increase opportunity of selling energy next to selling fuel to their customers, and offering DC fast charging, especially on their fuel courts is very important. Plus, DC fast charging also offers them the possibility to sell, let's say, a lot of energy in a short period of time. Now, including that with their additional services that they offer in their shops. I think that's an important switch you see many fuel retailers making now. If you look at Shell, if you look at BP, just drive along the highway, especially here in Europe, we see the EV chargers just popping up. And that is just for passenger cars. The next one and the next market, I think that's also going to be increasing rapidly. And if you look at those numbers, these are quite significant, although the numbers are still small, are the truck market and the fleet markets. Commercial light vehicles, trucks, they probably need even more energy than what is being offered to passenger cars.
Mm-hmm. John, you do lots of research work through the Fuels Institute. Well, before we get into what was the best timing on what kind of technology is the best to install, what benefits do you see for gas station operators or convenience store operators in the installation of chargers?
I think, right now, fuel retailers have a monopoly on transportation energy. If you want to travel, you have to go buy gas or diesel fuel. But as the market grows, and I think the numbers you showed for US are quite higher than anything I've seen. I saw numbers around 350 to 400,000 units sold last year that included plug-in hybrids. So the US is so far behind Europe and China in terms of its development. But it really becomes the situation that, most of the profit of a fuel retailer comes from inside the store. And if we're seeing a transition of consumers to a new powertrain, the question I challenge retailers to ask themselves is, do you want your customer who trades in their gasoline and internal combustion engine and buys an electric vehicle, do you want them coming back? I think the answer is yeah, you want them coming back. And they may not even use the charger, but the mindset is if my convenience retailer isn't offering a charging station, they don't care about me. And I'm gonna go someplace that does. Because if I'm on a long trip, I'm gonna have to recharge. I need to go a place that has a charging, but I'm also focused on opportunity charging. If there's a charger there and I'm going to be there 10, 15 minutes, I might as well plug in. And if you don't have that charger, then I'm not coming to your store anymore. And so there's that dynamic that you need to be able to service your customers based on what they want, not based on what you want to sell them. You need to sell them what they want or offer them services that they want. And I think that's really where we're heading, because whether you think EVs are going to take over the world or not, they're going to have a huge chunk of the market. And you're going to need to be selling petroleum, you're going to be selling electrons at the same time. And at some point, maybe you need to sell hydrogen. But you need to be open to the evolution of the market to capitalize on that throughput, keep those customers coming back to your store. Otherwise, you might as well bolt up your shop now, because if you're not evolving with the market's going to leave you behind.
Robert, I don't know if you want to jump in there in this kind of introduction question.
Yes, sure, because John is absolutely right from my point of view. It's about customer loyalty. Yeah, and if a traditional petrol station is not jumping on this EV business, they will lose the customer of the future. Because you have seen these 72% in Norway of electric cars that have been sold, these 45% in Sweden, and this will grow in other countries as well. So, and if you want to attract these customers, the electric vehicle drivers, you need to invest in this business. Otherwise, you can go to the next retailer, you can go wherever you want to charge in future. It's not necessarily that you have to drive to a petrol station for charging. You can do it more or less everywhere right now.
Before we get into the next question, I'm going to launch the first poll. Yeah. So people can answer as we speak, which is basically around charging strategy and the time frame that we're looking at. Because the key question for many fuel retailers is when to get into the game. They understand that it's coming, they understand that, but they don't know if it's going to be in 3 years' time, 5 years, 7 years. Robert, when you think of a fuel retailer, do you think there's one path for everyone, or does each network or each player, each station need to have their own strategy and time frame?
On high level, I would say it's the same strategy. And my view is you need to do it now. Because again, coming back to the customer loyalty, if you don't do it now, I will not go there anymore in future. And from various interviews, we get aware the EV driver or the consumer today, he is also okay to drive 5 minutes longer to reach a destination or to reach a petrol station, a supermarket where he can charge. And if you miss now this short window where you attract your customer and offer these services of charging, that the customer, the consumer, the EV driver will go to another place. Because tomorrow, as said, you can charge more or less everywhere. You can charge at home, you can charge at hotels, at petrol stations, of course, at retailers, when you are at the supermarket. So why should I? So you have to attract these people. You have to work on your customer loyalty, that the customer comes back again and again. So the answer is, from my point of view, you have to invest now in EV charging.
Yeah, I would say that the majority of people watching us do agree with you that 65% have voted that they would decide to invest now, with 25% saying from 1 to 3 years. But John, what factors would you look at if you're a gas station operator, in some part of the US, or let's say Europe? What factors would you take into account to decide the time when you would like to get into the business?
I think this is where we really see a difference between the EU and the US. So the EU is much more advanced. The profile of the market is a little more homogenous than it is in the United States. In the United States right now, 83% of our electric vehicles are in 15 states, which means there are 35 states that only have 18% of all electric vehicles. Guess what? If you are in Montana, you probably don't need chargers unless you're on a major thoroughfare. So it really is, you have to look at your specific market in the US, and I think in Europe as well. What's happening in your specific market? What are your customers doing? It's all customer centric. You can take a look at the trends and you can hear, the president saying we need 500,000 chargers by 2030. But is that in your market? Are you seeing electric vehicles? Are anybody else putting EV chargers? Are you seeing that type of evolution? Do you have the customer base that may move to an electric vehicle or not? And then that should really dictate your strategy here. I'm a big fan of, if you're doing any type of remodeling, install the capability now, future-proof, so that when that market is ripe, you can put a charger in for a lot less money. There's so many things you can do now to prepare your site for an EV charger when your customer demand is ready. Now, if you are on a thoroughfare where people are driving by a lot, your dynamics change because your customer is constantly evolving, and you want to be part of that corridor to get them across the country when they're driving across the country. So maybe you want to put in some high-speed DC fast chargers there. But it really comes down to what your specific market conditions are, and it's going to vary, especially in the United States, going to vary dramatically from one market to the next.
Mm-hmm. As we get to the third question, I'm going to launch the second and last poll. Don't worry, we won't be doing a load of polls today, which is regarding the power. So, Michelle, when a retailer is deciding to, decide there's time, they're going to invest the money. So you're going to decide between rapid, or slow charge, rapid, ultra fast. What makes the most sense as an investment, and for who? I'm sure you've done studies, and what does it fit?
Now, if you look at the EV driver, and especially then looking at the use case here, forecourt operators, you want to charge as fast as possible as an EV driver. On the other hand, if you look at the technology and let's say, especially the technology in the cars, that is not always necessary or even possible. So I'm going to turn a little bit into a bit of a technical explanation here, because many people think that the faster the charger, the better. And we can build as fast as people want, up to 350 kilowatts, from 50 to 350 kilowatts. But at the same time, this is not always necessary. And that is related to basically, the state of charge of a car. When do you arrive? We know from our data that most cars arrive between 30% and 75% state of charge at a recharging location. And that means, if you look also at most of the cars currently on the market, on average, these cars cannot charge faster than 150 kilowatts. So you can put a 350 kilowatt charger in the ground, but yeah, in fact, most of those cars cannot charge faster based on the state of charge, based on the temperature of their battery, and also yeah, then in relation to what the battery can take. Now, if you look at that, you can conclude, so faster is not always better, but you also want to look at the cost effectiveness of the install, especially for the forecourt owner. He wants to offer power that is suitable for now. We know from most of the cars on the market, with exception of a few, and we do see a trend that cars start to charge faster. So in the future, sure, you may need a faster charger, but at the moment, 150 kilowatt charger suits almost 95% of all the cars on the market, I would say. On the other hand, you have grid connections. You also want to look at availability of power on a forecourt, and that in relation to having possibility to charge and the right plugs on your charge station. So also looking at that technology, and we know we have CCS and CHAdeMO as the main plugs. Now we see the market is moving strongly towards CCS. CHAdeMO is being phased out. So there's a choice also to be made. What am I going to put on the plug side? How many charges am I going to be putting into the ground? It's important to offer maximum speed in relation to the number of cars that need to charge. You don't want to create a queue. Queue is often a bad experience for an EV driver. And as John said before, the driver will get back in his car and go to the next location. You don't want to lose that client. So in order to be able to facilitate that, we built chargers that can basically share the power on a site, even if the capacity is limited, and offer a plug to every car arriving. And since not every car arrives at the same time, not every car has the same state of charge, that is also important to take into consideration. You probably have enough power available to charge these cars at maximum speed. But essentially, I mean, 350 sounds great. 50 may be a bit little, but I think if you look at availability in relation to what most of the current cars on the market can charge, 150 kilowatts hits the sweet spot.
Yeah, that's what most people that have answered the poll would agree with you, that either more than 150 or between 100 and 150. And this is actually something that is debated as we see what the role of service stations are going to have in the future. That probably only makes sense to have ultra fast charging available. Connected to this is, I think it's connected to what you were saying, Michelle, which there's a concept that gets thrown around a lot, which is smart charging, which I'm pretty sure it involves some of what you were saying. Robert, I don't know if you want to say something on this topic of smart charging and the amount of power that should be suitable for sites.
So of course, smart charging will be part of the future, right? And this is exactly a trend which we see. It has to be most comfortable for the consumers to charge the car with less complications, of course, and that's why we're pretty sure it will go in this direction. But I'm pretty sure also Michel has here even more insights, as he is on the hardware manufacturing side and is much deeper involved in this kind of discussion.
Sure. If you want, I can add something. I mean, it's a technology that is crucial. especially on limited grid locations, you need to be able to share the load over a number of charge stations. You can do that two ways. You can do that locally, which we do in our setups of distributed charge stations, or you can do it via your charge point operator software management via OCPP, the open protocol that is built for that. So there's multiple ways you can do it, but it will be key. And you can even take it a step further. If you look further into the future, look at, and that's also things that we are developing, like battery storage, connecting directly to solar power or wind farms through a DC microgrid.
Mm-hmm. That's really interesting. Really interesting, Michel. We've got quite a good question in the Q&A, which I'm going to direct to you, John. Which, you know, it's kind of a common practice to avoid installing electric chargers near the fueling island. So does that mean that if most sites will have to offer electric charging, that we'll see a lot of small sites disappearing?
I think, yeah, not all sites are going to be amenable to charging. You need some space. The Fire Protection Association is putting in some setbacks requirements that require a little bit larger footprint to have petroleum and EV charging on the same location. You need to have enough distance. I think, you know, it's preliminary. I really think this is early stages. There's a lot of uncertainty. I think as the technology evolves, I think some of those setbacks may be reevaluated and there won't be quite as much distance required. But when you think about an EV charging event, you know, 15, 20 minutes, what are you going to do while you're there? If the site host doesn't have anything to offer, they don't have a food service offer, they don't have a dynamic store offer, customers aren't going to go there. So it may not make sense. When we talk to the EV charging companies in the US, they're looking for very specific amenities and footprints. They need 6 to 8 parking spaces. Well, if you're a retailer, you only have 10 parking spaces. You're not going to dedicate 8 to charging. And so there's a lot of limitations in that. So I believe, you know, over time, you're going to see a concentration in the market, consolidation. You're going to see some smaller retailers not participate in this market. But again, gasoline's not going away tomorrow. And so there's still a viable business in gasoline for the next several decades. The question becomes, are you be able to transition to the next phase of transportation energy? And some of those smaller footprints can't do that. So I think you're going to see a change in the demographics of the fuel retailing industry over the next 15 to 20 years, because there's so many other elements, especially in the States, that are going to affect their decision whether to stay in business or not. And I think that's we're going to see a very interesting complexion change over the next couple of decades.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to touch upon the topic of software security, payments and service, which is a very broad topic, but hopefully we can tackle it in the best way possible. Robert, Diebold Nixdorf have been servicing the liquid fuels industry for many years now. And as a service provider, what kind of challenges do you see in EV charging compared to those that you find in the sale of liquid fuels and let's say, you know, convenience in general when it comes to those things like software, payments, security?
Okay, let's start with payments first. So for us, being part also of the payment industries for many years, and also engaging here already with petrol stations as well as with traditional retailers. If you do your payment transactions in the store at a traditional cash desk or outside at the charger, is from a software point of view the same. You know, the software that is handling all the transactions in the background is one-to-one similar. If you enter your credit or debit card PIN code inside the store at a little terminal, or doing it outside via PIN on glass or via a payment terminal, it's just another device that is attached to the payment software. Where we need to focus on is of course the security part. Yeah? Nowadays in a store itself, it's a protected environment. You have to take care that the communication is encrypted, and the same then is of course valid for the charger. So we need to have a encrypted communication from the charger to the backend, or from the charger to the payment software, to make sure that no one is, let's say, stealing your data, and that all this is in a safe environment. And especially seeing then if a charger is maybe a little at an off-site location, or a charger is operating 24/7. There are not necessarily store members, staff members who can see what is going on outside. So with this in mind, a safe transaction is even more important in this place.
And it's just following up on that, what's the role of the data will play in kind of like the charging ecosystem? Robert,
data are a super important role in the charging ecosystem. It's one of the key assets you have, besides, of course, many others. We initially briefly touched the topic of availability. Yeah, the worst thing what can happen is that you reach out to a charging station that it's not in operation. But if you collect all the data, if you do data analytics, if you have a monitoring system sitting on top of your charging network, and you see already that something is going wrong, then you can proactively either remote do a restart, or fix a problem remote, or you send upfront a technician and the problem gets fixed before an EV driver gets aware of this and gets frustrated. So, and with this mindset, of course, you can be even more proactive. You can switch into a predictive maintenance mode, and really observe, monitor your charger network, and then react before something is broken, which absolutely has a positive impact of your uptime and availability. And these two things are really key. So from my point of view, data analytics is a key success factor for providing best-in-class services and highest availability to your customer.
Michelle, what are the biggest challenges that you see when it comes to security and payments in the charging ecosystem?
Yeah, I think one thing we have to realize about the EV charging market in relation to the fuel station market, still a very young industry. And only a couple of years ago, everybody was providing free energy in order to build an infrastructure to get, look at the Tesla model, to get people basically in their cars. And now that is basically evolved to systems that are becoming critical infrastructure. If you look at you showed some numbers on the uptake in various countries, but the average uptake in Europe is about 20% of every new car sold. That means every 10 cars, basically two are being sold are electric. That means this infrastructure is becoming more and more critical, and therefore security is becoming more important, but also the payment methods. The interesting thing about EV charging is that you can do a lot because it's more software related than what you do with a classic gas station. Take, for instance, the plug and charge feature that is now being introduced into the market, where you basically, as an EV driver, you lock your payment credentials once, and the next time you come to a charge station, you basically plug in and everything goes automatic. So that experience helps the EV driver getting a much easier, flawless experience. On the other hand, because of the increase in uptake of EV drivers, basically the security of the infrastructure becomes more critical. And that's where also these new protocols that are being developed, security on the charger, which means secure communication from the charger to the platform via new types of open charge protocols with extra security built into that. And that is really where I think the next developments of installing infrastructure will focus on, especially because there are so many payment methods that are available: postpaid, prepaid, apps, credit card, this plug and charge that I just mentioned, and therefore security is really critical.
We can move now to a topic that I think is really interesting. So, as you mentioned, Michel, this is a very young industry, so many of the protocols and the way the things are still to be made, and so a couple of people in the comments have already talked about, you know, people experiencing getting to charging and being broken, the lack of reliability around charging. Actually, I remember speaking to John in another occasion. He said himself that once got to a charging and it couldn't work. So I guess what people are asking is, you know, what can we do to improve reliability and in general charge experience? John, do you want to start?
Number one, we have to pay attention to it. You can't just put a charger out there, walk away from it. I've seen so many first-gen chargers just sitting there, kind of collecting cobwebs. We had a speaker at our conference in December talk about, and her company goes around and works on uptime and try to resolve. She opened up cabinets and hornet's nests were in there, right? We need to maintain these systems. They're not being, in the US at least, they're not being used as frequently as your petroleum dispenser. So it's really easy to neglect it. It's really easy to not pay attention to it. That's the worst thing you can do. Because if a customer, and Michelle mentioned earlier, if a customer pulls up and goes to charge and it doesn't work, what's the likelihood of coming back? They're not coming back to your site because you're not reliable. And so we have to really make sure that we're focused on uptime and reliability. And I believe in the administration's issuing $7.5 billion to boost infrastructure. And I believe one of the requirements is you have to record uptime. You have to track it. It's to Robert's comment about data. We have to pay attention to these systems. They're computers. Computers have problems. We have to maintain it much more closely than the mechanical dispenser pushing out petroleum, because you only get one chance to grab a customer. And if you have one chance, and if you screw it up, then that customer could be gone forever. So we have to make sure that's a high priority. And there's going to be technical glitches. There's going to be software and connectivity problems. So you can avoid those. But we can avoid showing up and seeing a cable cut in half. We can avoid showing up and seeing the system just not working, but we have to pay attention to it. And you mentioned the charger I went to plugged in, didn't work. Went to the same charger a couple of weeks ago, didn't work. It's at a movie theater. Those kids running this concession stand never go out there and check that charger. So who's responsible for that uptime and that maintenance? And that's something that if you're a retailer thinking about putting a charger, are you going to own the charger and own that? Are you contracting out? We have to make that a priority as we go through our strategies.
And then there's another topic compared to this, which is not only the reliability, which I'm sure as there's more usage, it will become more common to have very reliable chargers, especially if you have them on a site where there's a lot of traffic. But then there's another point about the charging experience, right? I know that John, you've also done some work with the Electric Vehicle Council, but it's more about the experience of, you know, what do you put a canopy over the chargers? What kind of, so in that sense, Robert, I don't know if you have anything to say on that topic of how to improve the charging experience as a whole.
Yeah, so of course the charging experience is super important for the EV driver. Yeah, I always say when I do a road trip, I travel long distance for 800 kilometers, whatever, I know for sure I have to recharge at a certain point of time. So from consumer journey, customer journey point of view, I want to pre-book my charger. So when I arrive at a point where I have to recharge, it should be reserved already for me. And then ideally, via the same app, without any interruptions, I want to order a coffee or a salad or whatever. And while my car is charging for 15, 20 minutes, then I can have a little walk outside and drink my coffee, or I sit outside or inside and eat my salad or my hamburger or whatever. And this experience, with this, you also then attract, of course, the EV driver. So, and this is an important factor, because charging a car nowadays, it takes longer than the traditional refill of a car. at a petrol station. So therefore you have to offer something special to the EV driver. And this is from making their life as easy as possible to get the car charged, like plug and charge, for example, but then also to, let's say, entertain the EV driver, however you do it, with serving food, serving drinks, getting a massage or whatever during the charging process, so that there is a certain experience and you create excitement during that waiting time.
Oscar, if I can pile onto that too. So the past chairman of NACS, Kevin Smart, put in a couple of chargers at a brand new site, and he was telling the NACS audience, so I'm standing in my store, it's a beautiful store, I'm excited, and I look out and like way over there are my chargers. There's no canopy. Why am I doing that? Do I not care about that customer? They're so far away from the store. There's no canopy. They're not protected from the environment at all. I remember another retailer told me we put in chargers, but we didn't put trash cans or squeegees out by the charging station. We have to think about the charging experience as valuable customers. We have to treat them right. We have to create an environment that's attractive, that is appealing, that encourages them to hang out for 15, 20 minutes.
And safety, John. I think safety is really important there as well, especially when you arrive at night. You want to feel safe. You want to be able to not walk too far on an area into the dark, especially if it's badly lit or you don't feel safe. Now that's I think really important, and I'd want to zoom into one of the questions from the audience here. Customers often complain about chargers being broken. What can be done? Now, we talked about what Robert mentioned, this preventative and predictive maintenance. I think that's key. But at the same time, I also want to focus on scalability there to make sure there's enough chargers that if a charger is broke, there's also a second charger. Again, it's new technology, it's sensitive technology, and even though reliability of many of these chargers up to 98, 99%, it could happen that you arrive and that something is wrong with the charger. So having an alternative, having that scalability also helps you to keep that customer, exactly as you say, John, to make them feel comfortable and safe.
Michelle, before I get to a really interesting question about pricing, which is also one of the hot topics that we all want to know, just one last word I'd like to hear from you, Michelle, on this, which is as a manufacturer of chargers, would you like to see more being done by retailers or by hotels or restaurants to make that experience of people using your chargers just more, a better experience?
Yeah, I think various things can be done. One is about the integration of all these various payment methods. We know that the fuel industry is a pretty traditional industry. The charging industry is quite a new, more software/hardware related industry, and they need to come together in order to move forward, to scale up, to support all these new EVs coming to the market. That's one thing, because I think fuel retailers sometimes think that a charger is the same as a fuel dispenser. It's not. It's a piece of complicated software with all kinds of communication and safety features attached to it. And also, I think additional interesting features attached to it, like a screen, to have maybe a promotion going or other kinds of interesting features. And on the other hand, I think education of the EV driver is also important. It's maybe not something that the fuel retailer should be doing, but they can help in that respect, right? When you put up a screen saying you can charge up to 350 kilowatts and your car can only charge at 150 kilowatts, many EV drivers will not understand that. And they may even complain, but they need to understand the rationale behind that it's related to the technology of the car. The car determines how fast you can charge, the battery temperature determines how fast you charge, the state of charge of your battery determines how fast you can charge. So it's quite a complex business to get acquainted to. And this education, I think, is also an important part of us, the charge station manufacturers, but also the retailers, to educate the EV driver to this new way of driving. It's a shift in the mind, basically. Yeah, it's in your mindset.
Yeah. So we're going to cover this question before I move into the next topic. So they asked, what are the tariff rates in the US and Europe, and what is the average margin per kilowatt the charging station owner can charge? How are they calculating the service charge? Is it based on time or the power consumed? Who would like to jump in?
Yeah, I can say something about that on the European market. You see very different charge, and the charge can also be related to the speed of charge. If you get a higher speed, you may charge a higher fee. Some may charge 49 cents, euro cents, others may charge 80 cents, depending on basically the speed with which you are able to charge your car. On the other hand, it's also important that you look at the cost of energy. Currently, the cost of energy is going. I think it's multiplied by 7 in the past couple of months with everything happening in the Ukraine. So there was an interesting story on the radio the other day in the Netherlands that some of these operators, they really look at the long term. So yes, you do need to make a profitable business, but it's a long-term business, and it's a business of volume, and volume is based on kilowatt hours. So also, in order to answer that one, I think in Europe you see that most of the retailers, they charge per kilowatt hour, and looking at the long term and the uptake increases by 2030, there shouldn't be any ICE cars, internal combustion engine cars, being sold. They're still there, but most of the cars are electric, and that means a huge uptake in utilization. And I think that's where the business case, which already is positive for many operators, but will really increase.
John, do you want to give us an insight into the US?
US is quite different. There are thousands of rate setting bodies in the United States, and they can set different rates. So it depends on which utilities jurisdiction you're operating in, what your rate is. And there's 2 rates. There's your kilowatt hour rate, and then there's what's called your demand charge. So if you put in 450 kilowatt chargers, that's a 600 kilowatt potential addition to your demand. And you're going to be charged based upon your maximum utilization each month. And those demand charges could equate to tens of thousands of dollars per month that you need to try to spread out across all your customers. So in the US, there is no viable business case to make money on chargers right now. As Michelle says, once we get volume and you have a predictable throughput, now you can create a pricing strategy that can cover your costs. And if we can get some working with utilities to get some demand charge mitigation, reduce those demand charges, you can create a business model. But it really comes down to volume. And that's why earlier I said, pay attention to your market, because if you enter the market before there's enough demand, you have one customer come in and recharge, that could take your demand charges and make it completely unviable. And so you really need to make sure you're matching volume with your utility rates. But what I've told the utilities is, in the United States, utilities don't compete. They have their designated jurisdiction of operating, so they don't have to compete on price. We have to create a new model where the electric vehicle charging system is a transparent, competitive model. And that is completely different than the way the utility system in the United States is set up. So we have a lot of work to do to get the United States set up so that this can be a viable business opportunity for the host, as well as for the customer, so they can make informed decisions. So we can watch Europe and see how that transpires. I think there's a lot of lessons we can pull from Europe to help educate us. But the United States is really at the kindergarten stage of preparing for this market.
Yeah, the wild, wild west.
Yeah, that's how we like to live.
So for the next topic that I've got 3 pictures here. Because I think we all agree that the service station of the future will be a multi-energy station servicing from liquid fuels for all those cars that are going to be on the roads for a good couple of decades to come, as well as for those working on batteries, hydrogen, possibly renewable liquid fuels, as well as gaseous fuels. But when we look at EV charging in service stations, sometimes it's very interesting to see the new competitors that we will have that maybe will cater better to those customers that we all said that sometimes they're not well serviced for. On the right, we have GridServe in the UK. They now have a network of a good few stations across highways in the UK, and they're purely electric based. And they very much follow the model of a highway station in the UK. They're selling liquid fuels. We have Shell's first charge only station in the UK. And then at the bottom, we have Parkland in Canada. They did a competition for concepts for the future EV station. And there's some tremendous candidates and some really interesting concepts. So my question, and we can start with you, Robert, if you want, is how worried should service station operators be that they will have this competition from charging only stations?
That's an interesting question. So yes, we see a trend. Should the traditional petrol station operator be worried? They don't have to if they jump on the train and if they go with the trend. Of course, if they don't act now, if they don't prepare for the future, I think John said it already, the traditional fuel will not go away for decades. So there is still a niche for them, but the business goes in another direction. It goes into a e-mobility direction. So they have to react, of course. They have to prepare their concepts. They work on their EV strategy. How should it look like? Is it a charging place only? Do we combine it with some grocery stores and so on and so forth? So they need to work definitely, but the traditional business, of course, will not go away by 100%.
John, do you want to add anything to that? Do you feel like a Shell will look at this model and say, actually, we're better off making charge-only stations and keeping those liquid fuels, more traditional stations until they can carry on? Or do you think we'll see more of a mix?
I think you're serving two different needs. I think those charger-only stations you showed are beautiful. And if I was driving an EV and I had time, that's where I'd want to go. Very attractive, very welcoming. But we have to keep in mind that the customer is time-starved constantly. And, if you wake up in the morning, get in your car, go, I forgot to charge, you're not going to drive out of your way to go to a designated charging station. You're going to go to the nearest charging station you can get to, and you're likely going to be a petroleum station. At least that's what I'm advising the petroleum industry to do. You want to be that go-to, that I have an emergency, I need to get electrons, where can I go? So I think it's going to be a mixture. I think those EV-only facilities will be more of a treat. I don't think they're going to become the norm, but we have to learn from them, because if you take the traditional petroleum stations, just throw a couple of chargers on there and don't do anything else, that's not the model we need to be modeling. We need to do a hybrid of what you just showed in the traditional service station. We need to take the traditional service station and bring it into the 22nd century. We need to customize it. We need to cater to those customers that are looking for a longer dwell time. And then there's a viable business model there, but I think it's going to be a mixture.
Yeah, Michelle, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's very important that these new players come on the market, because they're actually, as John says, they're challenging these traditional fuel retailers. They make them, also think about their traditional model and maybe even rethink it and coming to newer, smarter, better EV suited or multi-energy type of solutions. And as I said before, I think they will be there together. They have to. This market is going to be huge. At the moment, the charging of an EV is a bit slower than charging a fuel car, but that will change. The car manufacturers are working hard to get these cars to charge faster. Once that happens, then I think the charge time will be a similar experience as a fuel experience. But the fuel car will not be just phased out like that. I mean, even though we won't maybe be selling any fuel cars by 2030, or hardly any fuel cars, they will still be on the road, and they need to be catered to as well. However, EV solutions, they will take the major share of the market. And yeah, fuel retailers are now getting on board of this transition. Car manufacturers are really pushing to get this speed up. And therefore, at the moment, I think you need these additional players, because you need to have more fuel stations also to take the range anxiety out of the consumer. Consumer still major fear is range anxiety. You need to have all these locations out on the road in order to get the consumers into the EVs.
Yeah, and on that note, I think we're going to end the session today. I think it's been fascinating. I think we can take some really good points out of this, which is if you're a fuel retailer in Europe, especially if you're in a country like the Netherlands, Sweden, Norway, EV charging is something that you should probably be looking at. If it's possible and technically feasible, you should probably be looking at that part of your business. If you're in the US, it probably depends very much on the kind of region you're in for the kind of time frame that you're going to be looking at when installing. We also know that the charging experience needs to improve. You can't just install 5 chargers 20 meters away in the darkness, as Michelle was saying. The fueling industry has done a good job of providing a quality service with their lighting, creating a more safe environment. And that's something that seems to have been forgotten when it comes to charging, when they provide that charging experience. And competitors like GridServe will only push retailers to do a better job, because the EV driver will make an effort. If they're not, very short on time, as John says, they'll make an effort to go to that place that will, cater and service them in the best way possible.